Hey, welcome back. You know, it's been a big year here at the studio. The channel's gained subscribers like crazy, and the community is really starting to build. The comment sections are blowing up, and I love that. Being able to spark conversations and hear everyone's opinions is exactly why I do what I do. Now this year, we were able to start channel memberships for folks wanting a little bit more content and engagement, and I upgraded some equipment here in the studio to allow for 4K video production. It's my goal to get better and better as time goes on and to produce even more engaging and relevant content for all of you. Now, I wanted to put together a year in review video so that you can see the progression of topics this year and maybe catch up on some videos you may have missed, as well as maybe some bonus content you won't see anywhere else. So stay tuned. This is the Vintage Electronics Channel Year in Review 2023. 2023 started off with the channel tackling one of the legends of vintage computing, the ZX81, or as it's known here in the US, the Timex-Sinclair 1000. Believe it or not, this was the first time I had ever had the opportunity to really sit down and mess around with one of these. So those of you who are fans of the channel know that I just absolutely love any type of vintage electronics you can find, hence the name of the channel. I really have a place in my heart for computers because I was born in the late 70s and grew up throughout the 80s and was there for basically the birth of the home computer craze, the 8-bit computer craze. We owned a Commodore. I had friends that had Tandys. We had Apple IIs in school. I think there was a VIC 20 in one of the classrooms at one time, and maybe even a Commodore PET. So I've used them all, and I have an appreciation for all of them. So if I sound critical of this, it's not because I dislike it. I'm just trying to give my opinion. Everybody's got their own. You're welcome to leave yours below. Now, in the UK, this was the Sinclair ZX81. It was introduced in 1981 by Sinclair. Everybody knows who that is, Sir Clive. In the UK, this had 1K of RAM. Now, you could get an expansion pack. This is a 16K RAM expansion pack, which was actually needed for a lot of games. 1K really, if you filled up the screen, all your memory was taken. There was no room for it to do anything else. Now in 1982 is when Sinclair and Timex, yes, the watch people, actually struck up a deal to distribute this in the United States. So it made it over here in 1982. And it's basically the same as the ZX81. They just doubled the RAM to 2K, right? And it has an NTSC RF output on it for US TVs. So in the United States, this hit around the same time the VIC 20 was coming out from Commodore. And it had color, had slightly more RAM. You could get a disk drive for it. So in the US, we had a slightly different perspective, I think, on home computers. In the UK, these were wildly popular. You hook your cassette deck up to it, you get your games on cassette, you have a great time. But for some reason in the United States, that never really caught on. A lot of people over here had disk drives, whether it was a 5 1/4, 3 1/2, whatever. So these weren't really popular over here. And as the packaging said on these were really the first computer you could really afford. Over here in the United States, it sold for $99, and they actually came down in price very, very quickly. At some point, $79, and then even less. Eventually, they were given away. They just really weren't really popular. At one point, these were selling for $49 at the same time that Commodore was running a special that you could trade in any computer on a VIC 20 and get $100 off. So a lot of people bought these when they were $49 just to trade them in. So what makes these less popular in the United States than some of the other computers that were out, like the Commodore and the Apple II and those? Well, it has to be the RAM. Is one thing, in my opinion. Having just 2K of RAM means that to run any type of program, like we've got Frogger here, we've got the flight simulator, and we'll take a look at these here in just a little bit. But in order to run those, you have to buy the RAM expansion package. That's a 16K RAM upgrade. You have to have a cassette deck to be able to load your programs in. This did come with a really, really nice manual. I do have to say, for such an inexpensive, small computer, they did a really good job on the manual. It's a bound manual, gives you basic programming instructions, some example programs in there for you to work with. So they did a really good job on this. I will say this was a good computer if you just wanted to learn the basics of computer programming. They were really good for that. The downside, another downside, is the keyboard on these things. It's got a membrane keyboard. It's tiny. I mean, I don't have big hands, but that's the size of the computer. Very cheap, very plasticky. As far as inputs and outputs on this, it has a cartridge port on the back, which is also where your RAM expansion will plug into. On this side, we've got the RF output. That's a channel, what is it on this one? Channel 2 or channel 3 RF output on that. You got your ear and mic sockets to hook up your cassette deck so you can retrieve and save programs on it, and your 9-volt DC input, which ironically is the same 3.5 millimeter jack as the ear and mic socket. So as you can imagine, I bet you a lot of these were fried by plugging the power into the wrong jack on these. So a neat little computer. I want to take a look at a couple of programs on it so we can see what these look like. These are black and white. There's no sound, and it's a very low resolution, almost text character based output on these. So it's nothing really impressive, you know, for a real computer under $100 in 1982. We can give it the benefit of the doubt. But I'll let you be the judge of that. Let's get this all hooked up and hook up the cassette deck to it and try to load in some programs. All right, well, to get this thing ready to play a game, there's a few things we have to do first. Let's pick a game. We're going to go with Frogger, because I think we're all familiar with that. The little frog you got to get across the road and get across the river on logs. We're all familiar with it. Great game from Sega. So we will get our Frogger cassette. Get that put in our cassette deck there. We need our RAM module, which plugs into the edge connector on the back. We do need to make sure that that is seated properly. I have heard stories that if you do not get that in there all the way, or you try to take it out while the thing's plugged in, it could actually fry the computer. Our cassette deck is going to go into the ear jack on the side. Plug our TV in. All these wires everywhere. And then finally our power. Get this powered on. And let's see what we got on the screen here. Okay, well, my capture device doesn't seem to like this computer very much, so we're going to have to go direct off of the monitor here. But when you power it up, you get a K screen, and the keyboard on these is actually set up with shortcuts, so it makes it a little bit easier to type with this horrible keyboard. So we'll hit load, and we're going to play Frogger. There we go. Hit enter, and then play on our deck. And those lines are actually the computer searching for the program. It can either display video or load a program. So once it finds the program, we should actually get a little bit different. There we go. Get a little bit different signal there. And now it's going to take 4 minutes and 30 seconds to load. So let's fast forward a bit. Hey, there we go. After about 5 minutes, we finally have a game. Turn off the cassette deck. And remember, this thing, no sound, no color. It is all black and white. Kind of odd that this thing also has directional arrows on the keyboard, but we don't use those for the game either. We use A and Z and N and M to move the frog. Let's see, press P to play. One player. And I'm going to say I'm a 0 skill level because I haven't played this in years. So there's the graphics you got in 1982 on the ZX81 or the Timex-Sinclair 1000. This is Frogger. So let's see if we can make this little guy work here. I don't think I was too good at this when I was a kid either, but we'll try it. Let's get him across. Come on. There we go. Now these are the logs, if you remember from the arcade game or from the Atari 2600 version. Hop on there, hop on there, hop on there. And I probably just killed myself. There we go. Hey, we did it. So that is Frogger on this system. Not very impressive. I don't know that in the early 80s as a kid, I guess it would have been okay. I can't really get excited about this system. Let's see if the flight simulator is any better. Now, according to the box, the flight simulator takes 12 and a half minutes to load. So let's see if we're going to be disappointed after 12 minutes of loading and give that a try. We'll fast forward through that 12 minutes for you and end up back on the screen here. Pretty sure this is the longest 12 minutes of my life. Oh my gosh, it works. Okay, let's see. You want just the final approach? Well, since I don't know much about this game, that's probably the best thing to do. I'm reading through the instructions as it was loading. With the 12 minutes and some, you have plenty of time, so it looks like we do have key controls for everything. And increased throttle. We've got flaps, landing gear. Actually, this thing's pretty, seems to be pretty full featured. Let's see what it looks like. So we're going to hit Y for yes. Final approach. Wind effects. I'm going to crash it anyway, but I'm going to say no. And there we go. That is a flight simulator in 1982. So it looks like up at the top, we've got our front windows. We're at 800 feet, 151 knots. So let's go down a little bit and see what that does. Okay, so if we pitch down, it changes us up at the top there. All right, we'll go nose up a little bit. There we go. I have to say, this isn't the most exciting flight simulator I've ever seen. But then again, I don't think I really expected it to be the most exciting flight simulator I've ever seen in my life. See if we end up with a runway somewhere. Is there a way to see that? Switch to visual of runway. V. Oh, that's wonderful. There's no telling what that is. Okay. Let's go back. There we go. All right, let's try this again here. Yeah, I just don't know that I can get too excited about that. I guess if somebody was really into flight, maybe this would be a little bit more exciting, but I used to really enjoy some of the Microsoft Flight Simulator stuff. I always thought that was pretty neat. Yeah, it looks like I probably just crashed. Crash report. Yeah, that's what I figured. Crashed into the ground at a speed of 179 knots. Yeah, I don't think we're going to fly again. I think that was enough excitement for one day. So what are my final thoughts on this system? Well, I think we have to look at it from a couple of different perspectives. At one point, this was selling for $49 in the United States. That's $49 for a computer that's already put together. I would consider this a real computer. It does have a keyboard. You have a way of loading and saving programs. You can play games on it. You can learn to code. So for $49, I think you get what you pay for. If you wanted a better computer, you could certainly get that. You could buy a VIC 20 or an Apple II. But for $49, okay. Now, I still can't get excited about it. I don't know that I would have been super excited about it in 1982 either, considering what else was out there on the market at the time. But for a low-cost home computer, yeah, it's okay. I don't particularly like the fact that for most of the games, you would have had to spend more money and buy the RAM pack. That's going to be an added expense. And you'll have to have a cassette deck too if you want to load the programs. So if you think about that, you're probably getting closer to VIC-20 territory. I mean, at one point, they were selling the VIC-20s at about the same price as one of these. So here in the US, we have a little bit different perspective on it. Now, in the UK, where the ZX81 was a homegrown microcomputer by Sir Clive Sinclair, this was a great computer. This was what most people cut their teeth on, and I respect that. I really do. The games took a long time to load on cassette. That's something that we didn't deal with a lot here in the US. I know we had a Commodore 64 with a disk drive. It was still really, really slow, but I don't remember it taking 12 minutes to load a program. And most of the time after that few minutes that it took to load, it wasn't quite as disappointing as either of these. So I think it comes down to personal preference. I love the system. I respect it for what it is. It took a lot of engineering to get this thing down to the price that they did. They were cheap in the UK too. So it was something that every family could afford. Imagine wanting a computer for Christmas, waking up in 1982, seeing that Santa Claus brought you a ZX81 or a Timex-Sinclair 1000. So in that case, hats off to everybody that had one. If you had the Timex-Sinclair 1000 back when it was new, give me your perspective on it. Did you like it? Was it a great system? Leave your comments below on that. I'd love to hear about it. If you're in the UK or Europe and you had the original ZX81, how did you feel about that machine? Was it a big deal, or did you want something that did a little bit more? Give us your thoughts on that. Not long after the ZX81 showed up at my doorstep, a friend asked me to take a look at his old Colecovision game console. He had owned it since he was a kid, and it had been stored for the past couple of years, but he wanted to introduce his granddaughter to the joys of 8-bit gaming. Challenge accepted. I'm not ignoring my family being out in the studio all the time playing with old electronics. That's crazy. I wouldn't do that. Oh, hey everybody. Now those of you who are my age or a little bit older know that this is not a telephone. This is a Colecovision. And we're going to talk about this game console today on the Vintage Electronics channel. Stay tuned. Now, 1982 was a great year to be alive. The home computer craze was in full swing. The Atari 2600 had been out for a few years already, and Coleco decided to get into the home game market with their ColecoVision system. Now, this was a full-color, with sound, two-player system with interchangeable cartridges that was based around the Zilog Z80 processor. It had tons of expandability and ended up being a very, very popular model.
If you own ColecoVision, you already own a powerful state-of-the-art computer that gives you the arcade experience with the newest arcade games like Donkey Kong Jr., Looping, Pepper 2, Time Pilot, Mr. Do, Space Fury, Frontline, arcade controls like Turbo, the Roller Controller, and new Super Action Sports. And soon you'll plug in Atom, the revolutionary ColecoVision family computer module with new Super Games keyboard and printer. ColecoVision, the only system you'll ever need.
Now, this one came to us in a really sorry state. It's filthy. I don't even know if it works. So the first thing we're going to do is hook it up to power, hook it up to the TV, and see if it even powers on, see if it does anything. Well, we're getting the splash screen, so that means that it's getting power, but it's just not recognizing the cartridge. So let's get the circuit board out of here and do a little bit of cleanup on this thing. Now I'm going to start off with just a swab, a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, and we're going to clean the entire circuit board off. Then we're going to come back through with some deoxit, clean off all of the edge connectors for the expansion port, for the cartridges, and make sure that any residue and gunk that's been built up on those over the years comes off nice and clean. So we'll go through the cartridge port now, get that corrosion out of there and get that cleaned up. And let's give it another power on and see if it'll recognize the cartridge now. And it looks like we're getting the Qbert opening screen, so that means it's working. So now we can start by cleaning off all of the years of gunk from the case. I think this thing spent most of its life stacked in a garage somewhere. So we're going to go ahead and clean that off, and it's nasty. The top is actually worse, so I think we're going to have to go a little bit heavier duty on this and fill up the sink. Now, I know it's going to make my wife unhappy to wash this thing in her nice new sink, but we're going to do it anyway. And there are some stains that I don't think are going to come out, but that's okay. This isn't going to be a museum piece. I just want something to play some games on. So out of the sink, it looks pretty good. Not too bad. So we're going to go ahead and get it all put back together. We'll get the circuit board put back in. We'll get the power connector back where it belongs. And then we'll go ahead and get the lid put on, all of the screws put on, and see if we can get this thing powered up and playing some games. So a couple more screws on the front. I'll replace the label. And not too bad. Now, like I said, it's not a museum piece. It's not something that's going to be out for show. I just want something that works that we can play games on. And in that respect, I don't think it turned out too bad. What do you guys think? I think it's about time we got this thing hooked up and played some games. Getting one of these hooked up and ready to play is super easy. Being a system from 1982, you hook it to the TV via RF, plug it in, stick a game in, and you're ready to go. So today, I think we're going to play some Qbert. So we've got to make sure the system is off and play some Qbert. Now, this brings back great memories from childhood. I never played this game on the Colecovision, but I think everybody played it in the arcade and the home systems that did have it. So, you know, Qbert was kind of one of the first kind of 3D looking games, I think, that I remember playing. And I never was really good at it, and apparently I'm not good at it now either. But it is a lot of fun, brings back a lot of memories to get on and play old games like this on original equipment, original systems. See if we can outrun the ball here. Have to remember what things do. Alright. Oh. Yep, I'm not real good at it, am I? Maybe I should give it up. Only got 3 more to go. See if we can get this level. Alright. Well, see, I did it. Not too bad for an old man. Over the past decades, I think this has fallen into obscurity just a little bit. And I don't think it really deserves that. It's an expandable system. For 1982 standards, it's pretty robust and it's a lot of fun to play. If you're going to be building a retro gaming collection, I think a ColecoVision needs to be there right alongside an Atari 2600 and a Commodore 64. Now, if you have thoughts or memories of this unit from when you were a kid or back in the day, make sure you leave those in the comments below. As vintage electronics and music people, we hear it all the time. These are dead formats. Sometimes that's true, but just because something is dead in the mainstream doesn't mean we can't figure out a way to make them work in our lives. There's actually been a resurgence in younger people wanting analog TVs for retro gaming, something I totally approve of. Other people like the look of an old console TV, or they have a Watchman they want to use, so I decided to tackle the subject of making your analog TV work in the modern world. Take a look. Alright, now I can already hear the YouTube trolls at their keyboards ready to rip me for this one. Why would anybody want to hook up an old TV to anything and watch it nowadays? That's ridiculous. There's no need for that. It's silly. It's crazy. You guys are right, so there's no need to comment below. We don't need to hear about it. There is no good reason to want to watch something on a 5-inch black and white CRT. So you guys are right. Now for the rest of us, myself included, we like to play around with this stuff for fun. Or maybe you have a retro gaming setup and you want to use an old CRT for it, but you want to use maybe a modern computer with emulation on it, and you want to get that onto a period correct piece of equipment. There are tons of reasons why you might want to do that, and it's not as hard as you think. In fact, this Mega Watchman behind me is actually running off of my phone. A lot of the equipment that you need can actually be found at your local Walmart or your local Best Buy. So it's nothing that's too specialized that you can't find. So let's dig in and I'll show you how I do it for my videos. To be clear, in this video we're going to be talking about devices that need an RF signal in order to display what you're wanting to see. So that's going to be a television set that uses channel 3 or channel 4 and let's say your device is HDMI or even composite video, and you need to get it into here. That's the thing that I run into the most. So what you need is actually an RF modulator. You need a device that can take a baseband video signal, like composite, and turn it into a channel 3 or 4 output on RF. Now, if you have an old VCR sitting around, you've actually got an RF modulator sitting in your closet, because you have an input for video and audio and an output to your TV. So you can actually use one of these if your signal is available in composite. There is a better way though. And for me, that better way is by using a dedicated RF modulator. With this, you plug your video and your audio into one side, and it outputs on the other via RF, and you can select channel 3 or 4. These devices are really easy to use. They require a power input and a couple of cables to hook them up, but I've found that if your source is composite video, that is the easiest way to get that signal out to your TV by RF. In fact, this one I found at my local Best Buy for $24, I believe, and I got an open box for $19, so win. But let's say your source is a device that uses USB-C or HDMI, and you want to send it to a device that uses RF. How do we get this to work? Well, there's a device for that too. And that device is an HDMI to composite video converter. It takes HDMI video on this end and brings it out as composite video on the other. Now this has a couple of different uses. If you have an HDMI signal that you want to input to a CRT television that has composite video inputs, you can use this and go straight into it. Now in my case, I double it up with the RF modulator in order to get it to the older TVs that do not have video inputs. So in the case of the Mega Watchman here that's playing the videos from my phone, we're actually double converting that video. We're taking it from HD over HDMI, converting that into composite video, and taking that composite video and then converting that into an RF signal to feed into the back of the TV. Now I know what you're thinking, you don't want to convert anything twice because you're going to lose quality, right? Well, that's true, but we're kind of converting it to lose quality anyway. We're going from HD to composite video and to RF. And even if the RF signal was perfect, it'd be 525 lines of interlaced resolution that wasn't really good to begin with. So in this setup, I'm not really that concerned about losing that quality. Now I know that there are devices that go straight from the 4K or HD video to RF, which still of course output a 525 line NTSC signal, but you kind of lose a little bit of flexibility there. I found that with this setup, having 2 converters, I can hook up just about any device that I want to just about any monitor or TV that I come across. So it's become a very flexible system for me to use. Now, if you have thoughts about it or you have your own system that you like better, be sure to leave that down in the comments. I'd love to read through and see what everybody else is doing. Since we're on the subject of analog TV, what's the deal with the VHS filters out there nowadays? Kids putting these effects on their videos and truly believing that VHS was an absolutely terrible format. It wasn't that bad, was it? That's what I set out to learn when I took on the VHS effect filters. I was born in the late 1970s, so I grew up in the VHS era. I was probably 6 or 7 years old when my dad came home with our first VCR. It was a front-loading Hitachi, and we thought we had hit the big time. Granted, I was still a young child, but I remember the recordings looking almost as good as the off-air TV we were watching. Now fast forward into the early 1990s, and now I'm a teenager with a passion for audio and video. I'm trying to get the best quality out of everything that I own: cassettes, albums, reel-to-reel, and videotape. Even with a critical eye at that stage, I still remember VHS looking fine. That's how I watched movies on a Friday night. They looked good, sounded good, and no one ever complained it wasn't good enough. Well, except maybe the Laserdisc guys, but there was only 1 or 2 of those in each town. But for the rest of us, VHS was fine. It couldn't be any better than the TVs we were watching it on to begin with. I set out on this video with a clear purpose. I want to show that VHS wasn't as bad as these filters and people's memories make it out to be. We just have to think about it from the proper perspective. For most people, watching on a 19-inch CRT from across the living room, it looked fine. So I decided to take my trusty RCA VHS camcorder and shoot some footage of the downtown area of the town that I live in. At the same time, I recorded the same scenes in 4K just for comparison. Now for clarity, modern 4K video is considered 2160p resolution. VHS is 240i. It won't be remotely close to the 4K, but I have a feeling it won't be as bad as you're expecting either. Bear in mind, these upcoming clips from an analog format have been captured and converted to digital, so it's going to look worse than it would have on a proper CRT display. I'm going to let you be the judge of the quality. So first, we're going to take a look at the original 4K digital footage, and then we'll apply the VHS filter. Now let's take a look at the same footage but shot on VHS. I don't think it's going to look as bad as you think. So what do you think? Did you think the VHS looked okay? Now, it isn't 4K, it isn't HD, it's not even 480p on a DVD. We're talking about old analog 240 lines of resolution on tape. Do you think it looked better or worse than what the collective memory nowadays says? Hopefully you think it looks a little bit better than you remember. But I'm up to interpretation. Leave your comments below, let me know what you think. And if you have any stories about VHS that you want to tell us, leave those down below too. I love reading through and answering as many as I can. Did somebody say obscure audio format? The Elcaset series of videos had to be the most disappointing to produce that I've done in a long time. From a dishonest eBay seller who sold me a junk machine packed and shipped in a box with no padding or support, to the process of trying to get it to work, even barely. It wasn't quite the groundbreaking and life-changing experience that I was hoping for. Well, hey there, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to go on a little bit of a trip. We're going to go on my Elcaset Journey. Now, the reason why I'm calling it a journey is because it wasn't as cut and dry and easy to get there as I thought it would be. So let's talk a little bit about Elcaset and how I ended up with this one here. Stay tuned. So you might be sitting at home right now asking yourself, what is an Elcaset? That's okay, because most people have never ever heard of this. The Elcaset is a very short-lived audio format that was jointly developed by Sony, Panasonic, and TEAC back in 1976. They were actually building on an idea that was introduced 20 years earlier with the RCA tape cartridge. Now, Tecmo's actually done a really good video on that RCA tape cartridge that you need to make sure you check out after you watch this video. Now, in 1976, it was widely felt that the compact cassette was never ever going to be capable of the same level of performance that was available from a reel-to-reel system. But the cassette did have an advantage in terms of convenience. The Elcaset system was actually intended to marry the performance of a reel-to-reel deck with that cassette convenience. But it's a bit of a compromise on size because it's still pretty big. The name Elcaset itself may simply mean the letter L cassette, or it might mean large cassette. Nobody really knows. But the large cassette seems to fit because the 1/4-inch tape inside is double the 1/8-inch width found in a compact cassette. They were both divided into 4 tracks, a left and right channel for side A and a left and right channel for side B. The cassette itself looks pretty similar to a compact cassette, only larger. It's about twice the size. And like a reel-to-reel deck, it uses 1/4-inch tape, which is twice the width of a cassette, and it runs twice as fast, at 3 3/4 inches per second. Now, this provides greater frequency response and a greater dynamic range with lower high-frequency noise, or hiss, than a compact cassette. Another notable difference from compact cassette is that the tape is actually withdrawn from the cassette when it goes through the mechanism, so that actually makes the tolerances a little bit tighter, and the cassette shell and all of that doesn't interfere with the recording. You don't have to have a great shell like you do in a cassette. Everything is brought out of the tape, which is pretty neat. The top of the line Elcaset decks have all the same features that the deluxe open reel decks do, like separate heads for erasing, recording, and playback, some remote controls, and heavy-duty transports, so they have really low wow and flutter. The system itself was definitely technically sound, but it was nearly a complete failure in the marketplace. It had a very low take-up by a few audiophiles only. Apart from the problem of the bulky cassettes, the performance of compact cassettes had actually improved dramatically by 1976 with the use of new materials such as chromium dioxide and Dolby B noise reduction. And the quality of the tapes had gotten better. So for most people, the quality of the good old compact cassette was pretty adequate, and the benefits of the really expensive Elcaset system made it really limited. Audiophiles actually turned away from Elcaset and towards high-end compact cassette decks like the Nakamichis, which began making very high-quality tape decks using that cassette back in 1973, and that was 3 years before the Elcaset was even released. the tapes that they made could be played on any compact cassette machine. They weren't limited to finding somebody else that had an Elcaset. So that's why the compact cassette kind of took over. Elcaset, it really began a really fast fade out in the marketplace in 1978. So it really was only around for 2 years. It was abandoned completely in 1980, and all of the remaining stock was sold off to a distributor in Finland. So in the United States, they're pretty hard to come by, but if you happen to live in Finland, that's where all these things ended up. My journey with the Elcaset actually started on eBay. I've been looking for one of these for a really long time, and I found one that was supposed to be in good working condition. Well, that was just the start of my journey. Check out what happened when it arrived from my May channel update video. So let's open this up here. And yeah, I can already tell that's all that was protecting the bottom of the unit. That's all that was protecting the back. That's all that was protecting the front. And that's the other side of it. Now, mind you, there's a bunch of buttons and displays on the front of this thing, so I'm almost afraid to pull it out of the box. Let's get it pulled out of here. We'll see what kind of surprise I've got for you. Yeah, that's pretty sad. That was the packing on a relatively rare piece of equipment. That's all the guy had in there. So yeah, this was a lesson in how not to pack something. Yeah, lid's kind of loose or damaged up here in the corner, damaged here, sides cracked. Yeah, I don't know how this thing's going to work. So it obviously ended up needing some repairs. It wasn't the simplest machine to work on, but I was sure hoping the reward exceeded the work. Now, the seller had told me that the machine hadn't been used regularly in over a year. While looking at the belts inside, there's no way this thing had worked for years. So I got started taking things apart so I could get the belts out and replace them with some brand new ones and hopefully get this thing working. Obviously, it wasn't going to do a thing with loose belts on it. So I was able to find that if I removed the one screw on that flywheel, that I was able to get the old belt out pretty easily. A little bit fiddly, but if you can get your fingers in there, it's pretty easy to get that belt out. Now the one on the bottom is just about as easy. Just got to get it over both of those pulleys and off of the motor down in the bottom corner. Now I was a little bit disappointed that in shipping, the edges of those pulleys had kind of cracked a little bit, and I was hoping that that wouldn't cause an issue with playback or recording. Well, guess we'll find out once we get the new belts on. So after we get this one off of here, we'll be able to dig out the new belts, which were available online luckily, and we'll just kind of thread those through. Shouldn't be too hard, just a matter of getting it around the flywheel and then getting it over the pulley on the bottom. Now once we get that one in there, and make sure that everything's lined up and flipped around right, then we'll be able to get the other belt on the bottom. A little bit of the same, get it over the motor there on the bottom corner, and everything seems to be working fine. You can see the chips on that big white pulley down there at the bottom, but it doesn't seem to be affecting the way the belt's traveling. Now the next step was to remove all of the knobs on the front panel and all the screws holding that on. That way I could get the front panel off of it. I wasn't getting any rewind or fast forward, so I had to take apart the entire front mechanism and try to clean off those idlers just a little bit to get it where it was working. Finally worked pretty good. A little bit of cleanup on the front to get some marker and some residue off of it, and especially down on the buttons, they were pretty grimy. So a little bit of isopropyl alcohol and a swab, and we were able to get those pretty clean. There's a lot of little nooks and crannies on the front of the Sony Elcaset deck that you have to try to get into. But overall, it wasn't too bad as far as the repair and cleanup goes. Just a little bit of gunk. So after all of that, I still have a broken VU meter and a pretty slow rewind. But I want to see if the quality of the Elcaset is what I'm hoping it will be. Better than a compact cassette, and perhaps even reaching the quality of one of my reel-to-reel machines. For this test, I recorded a high-quality digital file onto a blank ferrochrome Elcaset and hoped for the best. I'm going to play you just a little bit of the original digital recording so you can get an idea of the quality, and then I'll switch over to the Elcaset. See if you can tell the difference. So what did you think? To my ears, it sounds pretty good. I think it sounds better than a compact cassette for sure. It's not to the level of a 2-track, 15-inch per second reel-to-reel, but I really didn't expect it to be either. I do think it's comparable to a 7.5-inch per second 4-track reel-to-reel though. Let me know what your thoughts are on the Elcaset. Did you own one? Know anybody who did? Had you heard of it before? What about the sound quality? As always, I appreciate you taking the time to watch, and please hit the subscribe button below. You really have no idea how much it helps the channel. Toward the middle of the year, I started noticing the buzz about cassettes again. Not just from people from my generation or older, but from younger people getting into it for the first time. People who never saw them before, who grew up strictly in the digital age. So I felt it was time for a simplified beginner's guide to cassette. There are plenty of videos for audiophiles and advanced users, but I wanted to present an easier to follow plug-and-play guide for people just getting into the hobby. Welcome back to the channel. You know, if you're here, that means that you're probably interested in cassette tapes. And I think that's great. If you're like me, you grew up with them and you remember them being great and terrible and both all at the same time. Today, we're going to talk about the humble cassette tape, its history, concept, and how to make the most of it today if you're a beginner. Even if you're a pro, you might still learn something. Stay tuned for a crash course, the Vintage Electronics Channel Beginner's Guide to Cassette Tapes, coming up next. I have always been a tape person. I like the sound of analog recordings. There's something about the warmth and the realism that you get from a properly recorded tape that you just can't match in a digital file. Tape is something that's tactile. You can feel it, touch it. You can see the progress of movement and the progression through the program. It's mesmerizing. It's audio as well as visual entertainment. I was really disappointed when physical media all but died out, but we can keep it alive ourselves. I don't pretend to be an audiophile by any stretch of the imagination, so this video is not for audiophiles. It's for regular people and enthusiasts who want to use their vintage equipment and have fun doing so. Maybe I'll do a more advanced video in the future, but for now, let's help just regular folks get into the vintage audio scene who may have questions or want some basic knowledge or information. We're not going to get into adjusting bias levels or azimuth in this video. We aren't even going to cover auto calibration. Just plug and play cassette recording that most people will do in their home. I think to fully appreciate how far the cassette has come, we need to go back to the beginning, just briefly. After all, the compact cassette wasn't developed with high-quality music in mind. If we go back to the year 1963, Lou Ottens and his team from Philips had wrapped up development and the compact cassette was born. They had set out to devise a solution to open reel formats that were difficult to thread and came in all sorts of sizes and recording speeds. They wanted to make a standardized tape cartridge that was easy to use, had long recording time, and didn't require the user to have to touch the tape to thread the machine. Their solution was the now familiar design we now refer to simply as a cassette. At the beginning, the quality wasn't good enough to make it a music format, but as time went on, it became a serious contender. By the mid-1970s, the sound quality had become high enough for music enthusiasts to really take notice. Improvements in tape types and equipment drove the cassette to popularity from that point forward. Physically, cassettes hold two spools, one supply spool and one take-up spool. Wound around those is quarter-inch magnetic tape in lengths up to 120 or even 180 minutes towards the end of the format's life. Most common were the 60 and 90-minute cassettes that we're all familiar with, as those longer lengths really tended to be a bit fragile. Since the 1960s, almost all music cassettes were 4-track systems. This means they hold 2 stereo tracks on each side, for a total of 4 tracks. The tape head pushes into the felt pad in the middle for playback and recording, as well as an erase head, capstan, and pinch roller. On the top, you'll find notches that can be popped out to prevent recording over your tape, as well as other notches that dictate the type of tape inside. The type of tape that you record on is just as important as the equipment that you use. If I think back to when I was a child and a teenager, most of the equipment that I used was low quality, and I could only afford cheap tapes from discount stores. I believe many of us share that experience, and if your enjoyment of the format ended before you were able to experience the quality from tape, I'm really sorry to hear that. I hope we can change that for you today. Like anything else in life, you get out of a cassette what you put into it. If you start with a low-quality cassette and put it into a low-quality machine, guess what the results are going to be? Pretty bad. So what are the types of tape? There are actually 4 different tape types, cleverly named as Type 1, 2, 3, and 4. Type 1 tape is the lowest grade of tape that you can buy. It's also known as ferro or ferric tape, since it's basically just an oxide coating on the substrate. Now don't get me wrong, there are some ferric tapes that sound excellent, but again, you get what you pay for. Some manufacturers will call them normal tapes or high output, low noise, but don't let that fool you. Always look for the tape type. It's on there somewhere. I bought hundreds and hundreds of cheap Type 1 tapes when I was younger. They're noisy and they lack top end for the most part, but they're good for everyday recording. Type 2 tape is also known as chrome or high position tape. These have a coating of chromium or cobalt that increases the dynamic range of the tape and results in higher highs and less hiss. They do tend to have slightly lower response on the bassier parts, but I feel they sound better overall. These are the type of tape that I use most often when I make my own recordings. I think they're a nice balance of low noise and wider frequency response. Type 3 tape is known as ferrochrome tape, and it's actually what you think it is. It's a blend of Type 1 and Type 2 tape formulations. So if you get the crisp highs of a chrome tape and you put it with the base of a ferric tape, that's what a Type 3 is. These are a bit of a failed experiment and were only available for a short period of time in the 70s. In fact, most equipment doesn't even support Type 3 tape. Type 4 is also known as metal tape. These were the holy grail in the 1980s and 1990s. They were expensive and generally looked pretty cool, and had the best sound of any of the formulations. They had very low noise or hiss in the recordings, and had a very wide frequency response. These are very hard to find nowadays, but if you're really into cassettes and have the equipment that can record on them, I still suggest maybe buying one so you can experience what I'm talking about. So all this talk transitions nicely into equipment. If you want to record on anything other than Type 1 cassettes, you're going to need equipment that can handle the bias, equalization, and power requirements of the higher quality tapes. Most consumer recorders will handle Type 1 and Type 2 cassettes, but be sure to look for the proper selectors to be sure. You always want to match your cassette to the settings on your recorder, whether you're recording or playing back. Something else you might find on your cassette deck is Dolby noise reduction. Dolby was developed in order to lessen the hiss that you get on cassette tapes due to their slow speed of only 1 7/8 inches per second. This is purely personal preference, but I tend to not use it because I feel that it degrades the quality of the music. Whether you use it or not is totally up to you. This is about what you yourself prefer. So let's touch on the equipment that I'm going to be using in this video. After all, we do need to record something. So my workhorse cassette deck that I use every day is a Tascam 112. It's a prosumer model from the 1980s, and it does a great job. It's not a super high-end model, but it's not a cheap one either. It's kind of right in the middle. It has the capability to record and play back Type 1, 2, and 4 tapes, and also has Dolby B and C noise reduction for when I would choose to use it. I think it's only fair to use brand new tapes for our demonstration, so I have new Type 1 and Type 2 cassettes from ATR Magnetics here in the USA. This is not a sponsored video. I bought these myself. They manufacture new cassettes, and I've purchased my open reel tapes from them for years, so I was very happy when they started producing brand new cassettes as well. I have a new old stock metal cassette that I'm going to use for a comparison since they don't make those new anymore. Now we're going to pick a high quality digital file to record, and I'll walk you through the process. It's easier than you think, and it's a lot of fun too. To start off, we're going to record on a brand new Type 1 or ferric cassette. Now the first thing we need to do before we even start recording is take a look at our cassette deck and make sure that everything is in the proper position. We want our tape selector in the normal position or Type 1, depending on what yours says. If you want to use Dolby noise reduction, that's where you can turn that on. Select B or C or S if you have it. If your machine doesn't say B or C and just says Dolby noise reduction, then it's going to be Dolby B. Now, I tend to not use it, so I'm going to turn that off. We're going to open up our brand new tape, and we're going to put that in our cassette deck, and we're going to put it into record pause. Generally, that's hitting play and record and the pause button, because we need to set our recording levels. Now, let me get our digital file started here to record into it. Now, this could just as easily be a record or another tape or the radio, but we're going to use a digital file so that we have a little bit easier control over it. Now, the next thing we need to do is set our record levels. And this is going to vary based on the type of tape that you're using. Type 1 tapes don't like to be driven really, really hard. So we want to make sure that our peaks don't really go over the 0 on our VU meter. If your deck has automatic level control that you can turn it off and adjust it manually. It'll sound a whole lot better. So on this one, it looks like we're actually pretty good. It's every now and then peaking over the 0, but for the most part, it's staying below it. So I think we're pretty good. All right, so now that we've got that set, I'm going to go back to the beginning. Now, all tapes have a little bit of a clear leader on them. We're going to want to make sure that it plays through that leader before we start recording. Then we hit play on our source. And now we're recording a tape. Now let's see what we have to do differently if we're going to record a chrome or a metal cassette. I'm going to go ahead and stop this. Take it back to the beginning. Go ahead and pull our normal cassette out of the cassette deck. And this time we're going to try our Cobalt Silver series from ATR. This is a chrome or type 2 cobalt cassette. To get that put in the deck, same record pause. Now we're going to come down here and we want to make sure that our tape control is on the type 2 position. This one is chromium dioxide, same thing. And again, if you want to use Dolby noise reduction, now's your chance to do that. Now, as far as adjusting the levels on a chrome cassette, they can actually be driven a little bit harder and still be okay. So I'm going to get this one where it peaks just a little bit over the 0. I found that for most of the chrome cassettes that I've used, that's a pretty good setting. And we will record as normal. Now, what if it's a metal cassette? Do we have to do anything differently for that? The answer is yes. Now, this is a metal cassette. This is a type 4. So if we pop that one in, we would select our metal cassette. And then these could actually be driven about the same as a chrome cassette, some of them a little bit more. If you want to play it safe, keep it to where it's just peaking in between the 0 and the 3, and you'll be okay for a metal cassette. Now, the sound quality is definitely a wide spectrum on these, but obviously the metal cassette will give you your best sound, but these things can also be 20, 30, 40, 50, or even $100 nowadays, and most of the time they're used. So you kind of take a risk when buying a metal cassette. I would stick with brand new cassettes from good brands, just so you don't sour your experience with cassettes again like you did back when you were a kid. So now that we've learned how to record our cassettes, let's talk a little bit about maintenance on your cassette deck. Like anything mechanical, your cassette deck is going to need some preventative maintenance. If you're just pulling your deck out from storage after 30 or 40 years, or if you just bought one on eBay that doesn't quite work right, it may need a belt change. Now, that can be something that's a little bit advanced for a beginner, but there are plenty of old guys like me out there who could walk you through the process, or may even have videos out there about it, hint, hint. But for the most part, keeping your deck clean is going to be the key to getting really good recordings out of it. Cleaning a cassette deck is a pretty simple process. It just requires some isopropyl alcohol and some swabs. A clean record and playback head is critical to keeping your machine sounding its best. Now, to clean a cassette deck, the easiest way to do it is to dip your swab in the isopropyl alcohol. And if we look down here, we can see the heads. You have a playback head, a record head, and an erase head. Now these, as the tape passes through, can actually become really, really grimy from the tape coating that actually rubs off onto the cassette heads. So you just want to go in here with your swab and clean those off. Now, how often do you do it? Well, I'm always going to say follow your cassette deck manufacturer guidelines. But for me, I tend to do it before I record every single time, because I want to make sure that I get the best recording that I can out of my cassette deck. So we actually had just a little bit of grime on that one, not a whole lot. We're going to clean off our erase head. Again, just a little bit. Now down here, this is what's known as a capstan. That's what helps to pull the tape through the system. It's important to keep that clean too. You know, you hear all these stories from people about their cassette deck eating their tapes and all of this, and I don't think I've ever really had that problem. I think that comes down to people with dirty decks. So make sure that you clean your capstan. If it's a dual capstan system like this one, you want to clean both. And then also your pinch roller down there. It can get gummy throughout the years too, and that can cause a problem. So if any of those things seem like they're not coming clean, or they're starting to get soft or tacky, go ahead and replace them. Keep your deck in good shape, and it will take care of you in the process. Now, for those who are wondering what deck this is, it's not the one we recorded on. This is my VEC T3. This is a 2-speed deck that actually records at the standard 1 7/8, but also 3 3/4 inches per second, and it sounds pretty excellent. We've got a video of the belt change on there right now, and there'll be another video coming up on the channel here pretty soon going through the details on it. But there is a deck out there for everybody, for every budget. So make sure you take your time if you're shopping for one and get the best deck that will fit in your budget. Don't go cheap. You won't be sorry. I hope you enjoyed our video today. This beginner's guide to cassettes hopefully gave you enough knowledge to be confident in recording your own cassettes at home. Now, like I said before, this is not an audiophile course. We might do that later on, but I wanted to help those who are wanting to get into cassette recording for the very first time, or those who are getting back into it after a long hiatus. Just something to get you recording right away and enjoying cassettes the way that they were meant to be enjoyed. As I was producing that beginner's guide to cassettes, a channel viewer reached out, and while I normally don't accept items to repair and return, this one actually seemed appropriate, especially since we had just put out that video. He had a Sony My First Walkman. It was too perfect to pass up the opportunity to share it with everyone. This is exactly the type of machine that folks need to look at if they're getting into tape, and it was a really easy fix that just about anybody can handle. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do just a quick video tutorial on how to change some belts in a Sony WM3000, My First Sony Walkman. This one comes from a viewer. Neither of the spools were turning, so it looks like it's going to be a belt change. So we're going to do a little step-by-step on how easy it is to change these belts out. Stay tuned. Now these models are pretty straightforward. We have 4 screws that we need to remove. The first 2 are going to be under the cassette door, so we'll go ahead and get those taken out. Next, we'll turn it over and take the next 2 screws out that that are underneath the battery lid cover. Sometimes the screws can be a little bit stubborn. Now once we got the screw out, we can turn it back up on its side and gently pull the two halves apart. We want to be careful pulling this cover off that we don't pull any of the buttons off with it. Once that cover is off, we can immediately see what the problem is. One of the belts looks like it's okay, but the other one has perished and is stretched and is no longer around that other flywheel. So we'll need to carefully remove both of those belts. Now we've matched up the belt sizes with our brand new belts here. So we're going to go ahead and replace both, even though one of those looked okay. We want to make sure this has a good long life after we're done with it. Now the first belt to go on goes on a small pulley on the underside of that flywheel and around the drive pulley there. We're going to turn it and make sure that there's no kinks and the belt's not twisted. Everything looks okay there. And now we can grab the other belt, our main drive belt that goes around the flywheel and around the motor, and we'll do the same thing. We're going to spin that, make sure the belt's not twisted, and make sure everything's moving around okay. That looks pretty good. Now while we're in here, that's a good opportunity to go ahead and use some good quality electronics lube and lube up the mechanism. We want to make sure that this thing works for years to come. Looks like everything's working smoothly, so that should do the trick there. Now again, since we have everything open and we're already in here, we're going to take this opportunity to go ahead and clean the tape heads and the tape mechanism, get any of the grime off of there from years of use. So I'm going to use a little bit of isopropyl alcohol on a long swab, and we're going to get in here and clean the tape head. Not too bad. Gonna move over here and clean the capstan and the pinch roller. Doesn't look like this thing's too dirty. That's good. And then we'll finish off by cleaning the rest of the tape path. Make sure everything's clean. Now we can finish everything up by putting the cover back on and getting the screws back in. And now the moment of truth. We'll go ahead and put a couple of AA batteries in here, put a tape in, and make sure it works. Well, it looks like this repair was a success. This Walkman WM3000, my first Sony, is working great. So we're going to go ahead and get this one wrapped up, get this sent back to the customer, and move on to the next project. Hope this video helped. Make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And we'll see you next time on the Vintage Electronics channel. With the influx of new people getting into home tape recording, new old stock Type 2 tapes are getting expensive. Luckily, there's a company making brand new Type 2 tape. I'd used their reel-to-reel tape for years and was very happy with it. So I figured it was worth it to take a look at their newest cassettes. Now today we're just going to be concentrating on the ATR Cobalt Gold Series 60-minute cassette. Now this one is kind of cool looking. It has a reel-to-reel look. These are about $22 a piece, brand new. But you're not taking a chance with new old stock tapes or used ones, so we'll see if it's worth it. Now they also do have the Cobalt Silver series, which doesn't have those same cool reels, but it's the same tape. These are about $9, so these will probably be a good choice too if you're on a budget. Also, we do have a normal bias standard ferrite cassette that they do make. We're not going to cover that one today. We'll do that in another video. I want to concentrate on their highest end cassette that they're making. So the first thing we want to do is get this thing opened up, and we'll get our cassette deck calibrated up and start recording some music. All right, well, let's get this tape opened up and see what it looks like. From the outside, it looks pretty nice. You know, you don't get the experience of opening up a brand new cassette tape very often anymore in 2023. Takes me back to the 80s and 90s, and some of them were easier to open back then than others. This one's on the tough side. All right, so what do we have? Got a pretty nice jewel case, kind of the standard plastic jewel case fare. A couple of labels to put on the tape, but I don't think I want to cover up those reels. They had a pretty nice J card that we can flip over, turn the other way, write our track names and all that information on. That's nice. All right, we'll put all that stuff back in the case here. And take a look at the cassette. Now the cassette itself is actually pretty nice looking. Got the reels. The only thing I don't really like, and this is probably being nitpicky, is the tape extends beyond the edge of their little hubs on there. Not sure I really like that, but beggars can't be choosers. Looks like we got screwed together construction, which is nice, not glued. Good looking hubs, nice leader on there, and nice plastic reinforcement running across the bottom of that. That's something that I don't remember seeing on other brands of cassettes back in the day. So it feels like a pretty nice tape. All right, let's get this put in the machine here, and we'll start recording. Now I've already got the tape deck calibrated up for this tape and ready to go. The reason I'm using this one is because it's a 3-head deck, and we can switch between the source and the tape as it's actually recording. And what I'm going to do, rather than have you guys listen to it through my microphone and through the speakers, is actually capture the output directly into my computer through my Motu capture device so that we can get a really good idea of what it's going to sound like. So we've got recording set, we've got recording ready, we're on high bias, 70 on the EQ, 1 7/8 speed, so it sounds like we're about ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and get this going, and we'll see what this recording sounds like. We're going to start off on the source so that you guys can hear what the source sounds like. Now let's record that same piece of music on high speed, which is 3 3/4 inches per second, and we'll see if we can hear any difference. So what did you think? How does it compare to the cassettes that you've been using? Let me know down in the comments what you think, how you thought it sounded, and if there are other brands of cassettes out there that are being produced brand new that you think I should take a look at. Now, I do want to remind everybody that this was not a sponsored video by ATR. Now, if they wanted to send some tapes my way for reviewing on other stuff, I'd be happy to accept them, but this video here, I bought these myself to try out. I've been using their reel-to-reel tapes for years, and I've always really liked them, so I was excited when they came out with a brand new cassette. Well, that's all I have for this week. Make sure you like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and we'll see you next time here on the Vintage Electronics channel. After that video premiered, there was quite a bit of discussion about comparing the new tapes to old ones, and possibly using a different machine. I totally agreed, so I reviewed the comments and suggestions and produced a follow-up for everybody to see. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do a follow-up on last week's video, New Production Type 2 Cassettes. If you haven't seen that video, check it out above and then come back. Now that video went crazy, getting 20 times my normal amount of views within the first 48 hours. The comments section went crazy as well, and I'm still replying to all those comments. I'll get there, but it'll take a while. Now, while the response was generally quite positive, it did come up multiple times in the comments that the recording seemed to lack top end. I agree with you. This was not only the first test of the new ATR tape, but also the first real test of that BIC deck. I'm going to be doing some testing and adjustments behind the scenes as needed to get it sounding its best, if it wasn't already. Now, in the conversations that I've had with all of you in the meantime, it came up over and over that we really need to use a time-tested, properly calibrated deck for the test. Totally agree. It was also suggested that we compare the new tape to some vintage ones as well. Many of you think that the new old stock tapes are going to outperform the new one. I tend to agree, but time will tell. I also read multiple times that the new production tapes from RTM, or Recording the Masters, are superior as well. Now, thanks to one-day shipping from Amazon, I also have one of those that we can try out and compare as well. So buckle in, we have a lot of testing and comparing to do. Stay tuned. Now, I want to lay out my plans for this testing so that you all know what to expect and what I'm going to be doing. I have the new production tape from ATR that we tested last week. I'm going to be using side B, so we aren't recording over anything. It'll be new and fresh. We're also going to use this new RTM tape. It's a Type 1, but everybody says that it's going to be superior to anything else that's on the market new. It's based on the SM900 tape that has been famous in the reel-to-reel space for years, and it's a really good looking tape too. Now, I'm also going to be using this brand new Maxell MS60, which is their studio tape. It's the XL2 chrome formulation, so this will be our new old stock tape from back in the day to compare to. As far as the tape deck goes, we're going to be using my tried and true daily workhorse, my Tascam 112. This deck sounds excellent, and I've cleaned the heads before this test. I've run some test recordings to be sure everything is in perfect working order. I do want to remind everybody, though, that this is not a channel or a test for audiophiles. I know that a Nakamichi Dragon would be the preferred deck and the best one that you could get, but on this channel, we're more about vintage tech for the masses, recording and enjoying analog media for just the normal guy. I think a Nakamichi can make even a junk tape sound pretty good, and that's not really what we're going for. I want to use something that's more in line with what a normal person would be using. So that's my Tascam. I've picked a music selection that should give us a good read on the high end as well as dynamic range. We could definitely have picked multiple songs to test with, but I also didn't want this video to be so long that it puts you to sleep either. My Tascam deck is not a 3-head unit, so we can't switch between the source and the tape in real time. That was my main reason that I used that BIC in the other video. So I'm going to record all of the tapes, and then I'm going to play them back into my Motu M2 capture device into Samplitude Pro X7 Studio. I'm not going to add any effects or corrections to the recording. They'll be just raw. What you hear is what has been captured directly back into the system. I'll switch between the source and all of the tape recordings as we go along, in the editing. So, with that said, let's jump into part 2 of this series and put these tapes to the test. Now, just a quick rundown of the tapes and my thoughts on them before we listen to them. The first tape we're going to use is the ATR Magnetics, the Cobalt Gold series. This is the one that we reviewed in the last video. Now, I still think it's a good looking tape. It has the simulated reels, blue and gold, very nice, heavy construction, screwed together. I still think it's a great looking tape, but we're going to get to see this time if it really is $22 worth of good brand new tape. Now, secondly, we're going to be taking a listen to the RTM, the Recording the Masters brand new tape. These are about $9 a piece. Now, it is a Type 1 tape, but I think the case looks great on this. The tape itself is nothing to write home about, but they do have their branding on the case, which is nice. It's also screwed together construction. Tape's nice and dark. Looks pretty good. So hopefully this one will sound nice. And then finally, our new Maxell. This is their MS-60, what they call their studio tape. This was an XL2 formulation chrome tape from the, I believe the early 90s, late 80s. I used these a lot when I was younger, and they always sounded great. So it's going to be 2 Type 2 tapes versus 1 Type 1 tape. We'll see how they look. Now we're going to start off with our ATR tape. We'll get it put in the deck here, and we're going to go ahead and record across our music file to all 3 tapes, and then through the magic of editing, we'll listen to all of them back to back. So now my final thoughts. Well, I'm happy that my BIC tape deck wasn't as bad as we all were thinking. On the other hand, I'm really disappointed in the ATR Cobalt tape. To me, it sounded like a mediocre Type 1, and maybe even a little bit worse. I intentionally didn't drive this one as high and hard as I normally would a Type 2, just based on what happened in the first test. The high end was really muddy, and it was lacking all the way around. You know, when I bought this tape, I also bought a 5-pack of the standard Cobalt, which is their Silver series. I'm sad to say that I will probably not be using these. It's very disappointing, especially since I use their reel-to-reel tapes all the time, and they sound excellent. Now, on the other hand, I'm very impressed with our lone Type 1 tape, the RTM 60, made by Recording the Masters. It sounded excellent for a ferrite cassette. It retained a lot of the high end, and it didn't seem to get overwhelmed with the bassier parts either. Overall, I'd say that I'll probably be stocking up on these. They're very impressive. Perhaps this comes down to the fact that they're based upon the SM900 master tape formula, which is a time-tested and excellent-sounding tape. Now finally, our vintage tape, the Maxell MS-60. I don't think anyone was surprised that it sounded the best. I felt like it was the closest to the original recording. The highs were crisp, like you'd expect from a Type 2 tape, and it retained great low end as well, which is something that chrome tapes generally don't really do very well. So what do you think? Do you agree with my assessments of these tapes? Let me know in the comments below. Are there any other new production tapes that you think I should know about, test, and try out? What are your favorite tapes from the past? Everyone has their favorites. Since we're on the subject of new production tapes, what about a new production cassette player? I found a brand new Jensen on Amazon for $25, so I had to give it a try. After all, if people are getting into tape for the first time, they're probably going to want a new deck, right? Well, as we found out, it may not be the best option. Now, I already know what you're thinking. There's no way a brand new unit is going to be as good as the classics. Well, you know, I would tend to agree with you, but we're still going to give it a fair shake. Now, the one that I picked for this, I got on Amazon. It was about $24, and it was introduced on Amazon at the end of 2022. So I've got to assume that this was a new production model. I picked a Jensen. It wasn't a great brand back in the day, but at least it was a brand. Now, I'm sure some Chinese company has just purchased the name and thrown it on the box, but I figured if any of them out there should be good, it should be one that's a brand name like Jensen, right? Now, why would anybody even want one of these? Well, not everybody has the skills that we do as far as replacing belts and servicing these old machines. A lot of these are 30, 40 years old by now. So if you're wanting to get into cassettes, but you don't want to buy something, spend $100 or more that you may have to fix or may not work, a lot of people are going for the new ones. So I figured we may as well give them a fair shake and see how they work, what the features are, and see if we like it or not. So let's dig into this Jensen a little bit more. All right, so first impressions of the Jensen. Kind of a cheap box, but you'd expect that nowadays, right? Well, let's kind of look and see what they're saying about this thing. Limited edition color. Ooh, it's red. Okay. But they are calling it a stereo cassette player with AM/FM radio. So that's kind of along with the kind of classic theme here. It says it has a line out jack, headphone jack, detachable belt clip, and if we spin it around, play, fast forward, and stop, auto stop, detachable belt clip, stereo earbuds included, which I'm sure those are terrible, but hey, if you're just starting out, you need something, right? And it's run off of 2 AA batteries. So that's what they're saying about it. Now, did anybody from my generation catch anything that caught their attention on that list of features there? I'll give you a second to think back. Play, fast forward, and stop. Does that mean there's no rewind on this? Let's open it up and see what's in the box. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. But anybody that's my age and grew up in the late 70s or early 80s will totally know what I'm about to say on that. But here's the unit. I mean, it's light, it's cheap, but to be fair, it doesn't really feel any different than an inexpensive portable cassette player from back in the day. You know, they're all pretty cheap. We've got AM/FM radio with an analog tuning dial. Does have a headphone jack and a line-out jack, which is kind of cool. AM/FM selector. Let's look at the top here. Got tape and radio, or volume control, and stop, fast forward, and play. And then a DCN 3 volts right there. So that's interesting. So what does that mean? It doesn't have rewind. Well, if we look inside the cassette deck here, we can see that only one of the spindles is actually a spindle. The supply reel is freewheeling. There's not even any teeth on that. So that means that it's a super cheap mechanism. I mean, some of you may remember back in the day, the blister pack portable stereos that grandma would buy you that had the cheap headphones, the cheap cassette player that sounded terrible, and it only had fast forward and play and stop. So yeah, if you want to rewind your tape, you've actually got to flip it over and fast forward it to get it to rewind. Now we'll take a look at the mechanism here. Looks like a standard, pretty cheap mechanism. We'll see if we can get a shot of the heads in here. So yeah, not the best quality thing. Well, let's get some AA batteries put in here and see what it sounds like. All right, so we got batteries in the unit, and I played around with it a little bit, and I can verify that it actually is a stereo head in there. I could hear the stereo separation in the hilariously cheap earbuds that came with it, and I've got some external speakers plugged into the line output, and I'll let you be the judge of the sound quality yourself. It's so substandard that I'm not even going to do a direct capture of it. I don't think it's even worthy of that. I mean, it's pretty bad. So we're going to go ahead and plug in our tape with our YouTube audio library. Now I'm going to start this. I'm going to walk a little bit closer to the speakers to get the sound into the mic a little bit better. But when you hit play, before the music starts, you can actually hear all of the buzzing and noise that's coming off of the tape. And just listen for it yourself to see what you think. Now granted, I did not expect this thing to be great, but it's not even, it doesn't even meet my minimum expectations for something like this. But, I mean, what can you expect? The cassette has been dead for years. Let's go ahead and stop that. Now, one other thing that I did notice, if we flip this over so that we can rewind it, and we hit fast forward, you can see the tape moving in there. Now once it gets to the end, it does automatically stop. So the auto stop function does seem to work. If we try to play it, it kicks right back off. So at least they got that part right. But overall, a pretty disappointing cassette player. I mean, I think if somebody were getting into cassettes and this was all they had, they would probably be so disappointed, think cassettes sounded so bad, that they would immediately get out of them and say, no wonder why everybody hated cassettes. That's not true. Cassettes can sound really, really good. Let me grab one of my older units from back in the day. We'll throw the same tape in it and see if it sounds any better, see what we think. All right, so this is my Sony Walkman from back in the day. This is a WM-FX401 model. Now this was not top of the line by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a good model from Sony, did the trick. Now it has fast forward and rewind on it, so you can actually rewind your tapes in this one. You've got a tape selector for normal or chrome or metal. It's got auto reverse. It's got AM/FM tuner that's digital with presets on it. You've also got automatic volume leveling. You've got FM sensitivity selection. It's a really, really nice model that you can still pick up for relatively cheap. I think these go for between 50 and $100. And the sound quality, to me, is so much better. It's an actual cassette mechanism in one of these, and not just some Chinese toy from, Amazon. But if we hit play on it, to me the sound quality is just night and day difference. You got crisper highs, deeper lows, there's less distortion. To me, this is what people should be buying if they're looking for a portable cassette deck, a Walkman nowadays. I think if you get one of these, you're not going to be immediately disappointed in how cassettes sound. And I think this could be the start for somebody to really get into the tape hobby and really enjoy themselves. So if I had to compare them, the new Jensen, probably going to go in the trash. I don't think I would give this to my worst enemy. So unfortunately, not a good review for it. I was hoping that this thing would actually end up being pretty decent, that it would exceed my expectations and be something that I could recommend to people to use who are wanting to get into cassettes. But I can't with a clear conscience do that. So my opinion is stay away from the new production cassette players, whether they're portable or full size, doesn't matter, boom boxes, stay away from them. And if you want to get into it, I would look at getting into it with a good working serviced classic like my Sony here. Just my opinion. I'm sure everybody else has their own thoughts with it. Let me know what you think. Leave your comments down below. Make sure you like the video and subscribe. We'll have some more stuff coming out soon. But until next time, I've been Chad. This has been the Vintage Electronics channel, and we'll see you next time. After that video aired, a viewer suggested having a look inside that deck before I tossed it in the trash. Now that was a great idea, and I'm glad he suggested it. What we found inside was shocking. If you're familiar with the cheap Tinashen tape mechanism, get ready for something worse. Well, we're going to keep this a pretty laid-back, casual video today. We're just going to take this thing apart and have a look at the inside and see if the internals match the sound quality. So we'll get started here. It looks like there are only 4 screws holding it together from what I can see on here. So we'll go ahead and get those out of here. There's one. I was actually surprised with this one that it was a stereo head. As was pointed out in the comments of the last video as well, a lot of the cheap Chinese stuff, they throw a mono head in it, and it's not even stereo. And it's a shame. There's even boom boxes that look like stereo boom boxes that they're putting out that are 100% completely mono. I mean, they went just as cheap and nasty as they possibly could on these things. All right, let's see here. Are there any screws I'm missing anywhere else? Nope, it's starting to come loose. All right. Let's see. I guess I don't need to be too concerned about breaking it because I'm never going to use this thing. It is absolutely terrible. All right, so there's the inside of the case. That's a pretty flimsy piece of plastic. All right, so if we look at the internals here, let me see if this whole thing will come out. Any screws holding that? I don't see any. Looks like it just might be the switches and everything holding that circuit board in. And the battery contact. And a couple of wires. All right, well let's get a little bit closer of a shot of this circuit board here before we take this out apart any further. All right, so that's about as close as I can get with just the normal camera here. But if we look at the circuit board, it's like a bunch of surface mount components. I'm actually seeing a couple of jumper wires on there. Maybe something wasn't working right in their original design. Looks like our maybe our AM antenna right here on the side. A little bit of tape holding, was that just extra wire? Yeah, holding those battery wires down. Yeah, there really isn't much to this thing, but we really didn't expect that, did we? Considering that it is not a full-featured unit. Let's get this out a little bit further. Let me grab a pair of wire cutters. It's not like I'm going to use this thing. All right. We'll just hoik this thing out of there. We may as well learn a little bit before we throw it in the bin, right? All right, so here's the other side of the board. For those of you wanting to see what this board looks like, I'll throw some pictures up here on the screen of what it looks like on both sides. That way you can reverse engineer it or marvel at its simplicity. But yeah, there's a few just looks like small tiny lacquer coated wire. Actually, that looks like that might be for the AM antenna. It just runs right across those wires run right across the circuit board on there. That's something. All right, not very impressive. Get rid of that. And then we've got the main unit here. Looks like we've got very cheap, very wobbly. The flywheel itself is plastic, which would account for all that wow and flutter it was getting. It's pretty loose too. I mean, it just jiggles back and forth. Standard motor, real small. I mean, kind of what you'd expect for a cheap Chinese belt on there. But then it looks like here, let's see, that's going to so that's for our single spindle, our single drive spindle for the take-up reel. It's just a gear drive right to that plastic flywheel. Completely plastic mechanism on there. I don't know if you can see that. There is nothing metal in that mechanism. It's 100% plastic. Plastic on plastic. The only metal in there, besides the hubs that those run on, are these little springs down here which double as a switch. We cut the wires off to that. So when those two springs touch, I'm assuming that yeah, that's for the fast forward and play. So that must be what activates the motor. I mean, just really hilariously cheap. We pop the cover off and we look at the top of it here, so it gives us a little bit better view in here. A little pinch roller, capstan, tiny little head. I'll get another shot of that and throw on the screen here for you too, so you can see a better shot of the heads. I couldn't really get that the last time because that door was in the way and I didn't want to break it. But now that we're not too concerned about that, we can actually see all that. So yeah, not too impressive. It's absolutely as cheap and nasty as we thought it would be. So, but if you were curious, there you go. That's what's inside one of these cheap Chinese brand new cassette players from Amazon. If you have any thoughts or comments on that, please be sure to leave those down below in the comments section. I love hearing from you guys, and we end up with a lot of nice conversations that start down there, I think. So after that completely disappointing look inside that brand new unit, I thought we should take a look at the top 7 reasons why I love tape. Now, they're just my own personal reasons. Everybody's different. But hopefully that video gave you some insight into who I am and why I do what I do. You know, I hear it all the time. Why the would anyone want to mess with tape? Or, I haven't messed with that junk for years. And I think those are valid opinions. After all, everybody is living their own life. And what's important to me may not be important to you. And what you enjoy may be unique to you and you alone. For me, I enjoy analog media. Why, you ask? Well, join me today for my top 7 reasons that I love tape. I'm definitely not young, but I also don't think I'm old either. I believe that I come from the last generation to really embrace physical media. Think about it. Folks my age grew up listening to tapes and records. Tape could be reel-to-reel or cassettes, possibly 8 tracks, but mostly the good old cassette tape. We made mixes, we recorded ourselves singing, we waited for our favorite song to come on the radio so that we could record it. It was a simpler time. We were also the first to really embrace digital music as well. Sure, there were digital audio formats before the CD, but the compact disc really was the revolution. Many of us bought our music collection all over again, this time on CD. We switched our cassette Walkman for a Discman and marveled at the crystal clear audio and the ability to magically play tracks at random. Eventually, we tossed our Discman in a drawer and downloaded MP3 music, or bought an iPod. Now we stream. We've been through it all, and we've enjoyed every minute of it. So why would we want to go back now and revisit analog tape? That's the question that I hope to answer with this list. So let's get into reason number 1. I can hold a tape in my hands. I can feel it, I can see it, but with streaming, you don't even have a digital copy of your music living somewhere. It's just up in the cloud somewhere. Now sure, it sounds great, but try showing your friends the latest album you just bought. What are you going to do? Hold up your phone? Cassettes gave us a physical copy of the album that we could own. We could hold it in our hands, we could see it, we could smell the tape, we could let a friend borrow it. You didn't need a username and password if you wanted to listen to your favorite album somewhere. You just needed a cassette deck, and everyone had one of those. And the album art? You just don't get that with streaming or downloads. Now that leads me to reason number 2. There just simply isn't any packaging on a stream, or even on an MP3 download for that matter. Pictures on a computer monitor aren't the same. With cassettes and records especially, you had physical albums with art that you could hold in your hands. You could read it, you could study it, you could enjoy it. Walking through a music store back in the day, I know many of my purchases were based on the art on the album. I discovered artists that I would never have heard if it wasn't for an eye-catching album cover. Progression? Well, what do you mean by that, Chad? Well, I want you to imagine something with me. Close your eyes. Now you've opened your favorite streaming app on your phone. You've picked a playlist that you put together and you hit play. Now you sit your phone down and you walk away. You've been listening to music for a while, enjoying yourself. Well, how much longer is this going to play for? How much of it is already played? Now that's a pretty tough question without doing a little bit of digging through your phone. Now here's a mixtape. It's at the beginning and I press play. Now what happens? The progression of the tape through the mechanism begins. I can see that this tape is at the beginning. So can everyone else in the room. Okay, now how about this? How much is left? How about now? You understand my point? With tape especially, you can always see where you are on the tape at just a glance. And it doesn't require any great skill. Now this works with cassettes or reel-to-reel, even records. Now that's vinyl for all you youngsters, but that's a different video. And maybe that's why I'm not a fan of the 8-track. There really isn't anything to see. But that topic leads me perfectly into number 4. Well, who doesn't like to be entertained? I mean, that's why we listen to music in the first place, right? It's entertaining. Now, with most types of physical media, there's some kind of a show, a physical process playing out before your eyes. The movement of the reels, the sound of the tape transport, flicking VU meters, flashing VU meters, lights. It's audio entertainment for sure, but there's a bit of physical show too. It's the culmination of all your hard work after you've made I feel really sorry for the generations who haven't experienced the joy and sometimes frustration of the mixtape, taking your favorite songs and creating your own unique masterpiece, sitting there and calculating out how much time you need and how much time you have on each side of the tape, carefully starting and stopping the recording at just the right spot, listing your songs on the J card. It was just an experience. We created tapes for friends. We had a tape for road trips, One for a first date. We had dance music, love songs, music to get pumped up, studying music. It didn't matter. You were the DJ. It was your creation. And we loved it. Except when we didn't. Now, I'm not trying to paint cassettes or even tape in general as a perfect format. It didn't always sound great. In fact, sometimes it sounded downright terrible, like garbage. But the times we got it right, oh my goodness, did it sound amazing. And here are a few basics of what you have to understand we went through when we were recording to tape. There are a lot of things to consider that all make a huge difference when it comes to the result. And any of these being wrong will make for a bad experience, guaranteed. First, you have the type of tape. Just like anything else, you do get what you pay for when it comes to blank cassettes. It was true back then, and it's true now. From the cheapest, nastiest of bargain basement brands to the highest quality studio-grade cassettes and everything in between. Second, you have your equipment. Garbage in, garbage out, right? If you have junk equipment, you don't get good results, period. I know the combination of cheap tapes and cheap equipment gave people the wrong impression of cassettes back in the day, and that continues nowadays too. Besides that, you have to be sure your recording levels are set properly, your source is good. There's really a lot to it. Besides that, we had something called generational loss in analog recording that people today just don't understand. Because digital music copied digitally is identical to the source. Analog isn't that way. When you make a copy of tape, it loses quality. Make a copy of that copy, and it's even worse. And it just continues on and on and on. So if you're making a mixtape from your friend's mixtape, yours is going to sound worse. Now, I always enjoyed the challenge of getting the best quality possible from what I had. That's one of the big draws of analog media for me. Even as a kid, I worked very hard to ensure my recordings were on good tapes and good equipment. All the levels were right, and the final result was always great. Well, not always. It's easy to get a perfect result with digital. It takes practice and a little skill to get an exceptional analog recording. And that's the part that I really love, the challenge. Now, that wasn't a surprise, is it? As we get older, many of us enjoy reliving some things from our youth that we remember fondly. Tape brings me back to a simpler time, a time before we had every song ever recorded available instantly at our fingertips. I think being more focused on what we had available made us more aware of the complexities in music and the quirks that made those artists amazing. We listened to many of the same songs over and over again. Some of us wore out our tapes. That was part of the fun. To me, it's nice to pop in a tape, watch the progression of time move across the front panel, and let myself become mesmerized by the movement and the lights, and just relax and enjoy the experience. After all, our ears and our body really are an analog machine too. There's something about simple analog music that just makes me feel great. I can bring that simpler time back, even if it's for just 30 minutes aside. I'm sure there are numerous other reasons why people love tape. I know I could probably break these reasons down into even more and have a list that's 50 items long and a video that runs for 2 hours. But these are really my top 7 main reasons why I still enjoy tape. And really any analog media for that matter. There's just something that's warm and familiar about it. That feeling of owning a copy of your favorite music. Something that's tangible and real that you can put your hands on. So what do you think? Do you share any of my top 7 reasons? Or do you have other reasons why you love tape? What about the younger generation out there? Do any of my reasons make sense to you? Or give you a little bit more insight into why us old people still mess around with this stuff? Let me know what you think in the comments. I look forward to the discussions and the thoughts on the topic. And I want to take just a few moments to thank each and every one of you for your continued support of the channel. You're all very special to me and I appreciate you watching. In the final video, we looked at some new releases on cassette. Now, I know indie artists have been doing this forever, but there are some pretty big names releasing on cassette recently. Since I just finished a video about physical media and album art, this was perfect timing to order a few of these new releases and check them out. Hey, welcome back to the channel. In a video that I did recently called The 7 Reasons Why I Love Tape, I talked about the things that keep me coming back to cassettes and reel-to-reel. I'll link to that video above. If you haven't seen it, check it out and then come back here and keep watching. The response to that video was great, and there were quite a few people from the younger generation talking about how they're getting into tape, or they already use it and they absolutely love it. And that intrigued me on a couple levels. First, I know that tape has had a bit of a resurgence over the past decade or so. Smaller independent artists have been releasing cassette albums forever. But in my research this week, I discovered some big-name modern artists who also been releasing on tape, and that really caught my attention, so I ordered a few and we'll take a look at them. Second, where are these tapes coming from? Who still produces these things? And third, I'm ecstatic the younger generation is enjoying analog media, having that physical copy in their hands. But the new equipment's terrible. Check out this video. So what can the new generation do in order to have a great experience with analog? We'll tackle these 3 things today. Stay tuned. In the 7 Things video, I talked about the tactile nature of physical media, being able to actually hold a cassette in your hand, and actually owning a copy you can see, not just some digital file that's streaming from an invisible cloud somewhere. I also talked about the packaging, being able to open that fresh cassette and behold the album art and the design of the cassette itself. It's something we just don't get digitally, unless you count a thumbnail album image, and I really don't. So that's really what I'm going to look at today. I picked up a copy of an album from 2015 or so, Beach House by Depression Cherry. It's a typical small release from that era, no insert, no album art, but maybe the quality of the recording will impress us. Second, I picked up a 2019 release from Billie Eilish, Happier Than Ever. It's a UK release and it has a nice weight to it and pretty good album art. Last, I ordered a copy of Taylor Swift's brand new release, 1989, Taylor's version. It's also a UK release. It too has a nice weight to it and some album art, so we'll see if any of these things live up to my expectations when it comes to the packaging and the sound quality. Now, one of the things that I mentioned before was discovering artists that I really wasn't familiar with from just choosing something randomly from the album art. The only artist out of these 3 that I'm not familiar with is Depression Cherry, and they sure didn't have the album art to impress me. Now, the other 2 aren't really my style of music, but they're new releases on cassette, so I feel like we have to check them out. Let's get these things opened up. Alright, so these are the 3 albums that I picked up. Like I said, we have the Beach House by Depression Cherry, Happier Than Ever by Billie Eilish, and the 1989 Taylor's version by Taylor Swift. So let's go ahead and get these opened up and just kind of see what they look like. Now we'll start off with this one. This is Beach House by Depression Cherry. This is one that, to me is pretty typical of a small release, by kind of an independent artist. Now this one's actually by Sub Pop Records, which is a label that's been around since, I think, the late 80s and has had some pretty big name people on it. But, this just kind of reminds me of a kind of a small release, maybe a promo kind of a thing. So there's really not a whole lot to this one. I don't see any kind of pull tab on this one, so we just kind of have to get it open. Now, I remember back in the day, some cassettes had a nice pull tab on them and others didn't. And this one is one of them that's a little bit difficult. Hopefully our patience will be rewarded, right? All right, so if we look at this one, it's a standard Norelco case. Nothing big about that. The cassette itself looks like a sonically welded case. It's a nice clear red case. Printing is done actually pretty well. If we bring the tape forward some, so you can see what the tape looks like inside. See if it's a decent quality or if it's cheap stuff. It's pretty dark. Doesn't look like the best tape in the world, but it's not terrible either. The pad inside is actually on a metal spring, which is nice. So seems like a decent tape. So that's our first one. Now, I wasn't expecting anything spectacular here. This one was just kind of for reference. Let's open up the Billie Eilish and see kind of what it looks like here. Now, On the outside, pretty nice album art from what I can see. It's the same as what you get on. This one was available on vinyl too, apparently. But looks like it's Dark Room Interscope Records in Santa Monica, California. 2021 is when this one was released. I don't know why I was thinking it was 2019. Maybe the original album was 19. But it's got a nice weight to it. This one says made in the UK. So obviously they must have a maker over there putting these together. Now this one does have a pull tab on it that's actually been pulled a little bit. Let's get it open and see if we have anything other than just a J card on this one. So standard case. Open it up. It's actually a brown cassette. Doesn't feel like the best cassette in the world. It's also sonically welded. No tabs, type 1. The label is just a sticker, and there's actually some bubbles under it. So I would say this is probably not the best quality. I can see, the window on here. For those that are in my generation and older, probably remember on nice cassettes, this was actually a hard plastic. You couldn't poke your finger through it. This one's actually soft. Feels like it's maybe the kind of the lubricating sheet that they put in there that just goes all the way across to protect the tape. So not expecting the best quality tape in the world on this one, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt here. Ooh, that tape is really light brown. So I'm not expecting anything spectacular, but let's take a look at the insert here. And it is more than just... See, now this is what I remember from back in the day that I really enjoyed. And it looks like she's kind of done that with this album to make it, something kind of special for everybody. Now it's got the track listing, but it also has all of the lyrics for the songs printed on here too. And when I was younger, not every album had this, but the ones that did just felt really special because you could sit back, put your tape in, and then you could sing along with it or just read the lyrics. It's kind of a neat thing to have. So while I may not be impressed with the cassette itself, I am impressed that they went through the trouble to actually do a proper insert on that. It's not just a cheap printed J card. I wish that tape was a little bit better though, but anyway, so we'll put that one back. Well, let's get our last one open, and then we'll take a listen to these as much as we can without getting a copyright strike. So the Taylor Swift album, this one was released in October of 23, so it's brand new, and I guess there's a story behind why she had to remaster it and do that, which I'm not going to get into because I don't care. She's not my style of music, but I'm hoping that this is a good quality tape too. Looking through the package, I can see that the cassette is 2 colors, which is neat. Looks like we got a decent J card, another made in the UK on this one. It does have a pull tab. Let's go ahead and get it open. Alright, so opening it up, cassette itself. Actually, it feels like the same manufacturer as the other one. It's a solid tape, sonically welded. It has that soft, put your finger through it window on the tape, so that makes me think that it's the same tape manufacturer. This was Republic Records, so a different label. I do like the printing on the actual cassette itself rather than just a sticker. That's nice. All the track listings are on there for side A and side B, so that's kind of neat. I'm expecting the same kind of tape in this one as well, but let's take a look. Maybe they did this one a little bit differently. This one has the longest leader in history. That looks a little bit darker than the other one did. Let's or maybe that's just my old eyes. No, that's probably that's the same tape stock. It just for some reason seemed a little bit darker to me. So there's that. Now, since it's made by the same company, I'm presuming, maybe we have a similar situation going on with the insert. Let's pull that out and take a look. And looks like we don't have lyrics, but we have what I would consider to be really nice album art on the inside. If you're a Taylor Swift fan, I could see why you would like that. And then we have looks like some photos on there too. That's actually really nice. I mean, a full color printed insert. That's actually quite impressive. You know, whoever is making these cassettes over in the UK, I'm really impressed. And I looked trying to find out who it was that physically makes these cassettes over there, and I could not find anything. So if there's anybody that's watching that can tell me, I really appreciate it, because I'm kind of curious. I appreciate the way they put all these things together. So I guess the next thing is going to be, what do they sound like? So I think we'll get our tapes together here, put them in the cassette deck, and kind of see what they sound like. Now, I know YouTube is huge about copyright strikes, and I really don't want to do that. So I'm going to try to play maybe just a few seconds of a few songs from each of them so that you guys can hear them. We'll kind of talk about that. If you don't hear them, it's because they got blocked by YouTube. So let's get these put in the cassette deck and see what they sound like. Well, that was pretty interesting in a couple of different ways. Now, those aren't really my style of music, but it was still pretty exciting to listen to modern music that was produced new on cassette. It did kind of bring back some memories opening up those cassettes. It was like being a teenager again and opening up my favorite new albums. So I did quite enjoy that. Now, if we talk about the quality of the albums, we'll start off with the Beach House by Depression Cherry. Now, this one looks like it may have been produced by National Audio Company. They're a company here in the United States that does cassette duplication. The sound quality on it, it was really hard to really get a read on that, because it's a very, very overly processed style of music. So it's hard to tell if the cassette isn't made to really good standards or if it's just the way the music is. And I have a feeling it may just be the way the music is. I listened to it online digitally, and it really wasn't much different. So I've heard other releases that National Audio Company has done, and they've been decent. So I have to think it's just the style of music. In the U.S., I would say National Audio Company is probably the biggest producer of cassettes nowadays, the pre-recorded releases. And, you know, you have to think they probably haven't made a cassette duplicator in years. So I have to think that regardless of who's making the cassettes, the equipment that they're making them on is probably pretty old too. But so that one was a little bit disappointing. No album art, no nothing, and then, you know, questionable fitness for a cassette. Digitally, probably okay. Not quite the right sound for a cassette, I don't think. But the other two I was actually pretty impressed with. If we look at the Happier Than Ever album, the Billie Eilish album, this one actually brought me back to the heyday of cassettes, being able to open this thing up brand new, pull the cassette out, you know, see a pretty nice label on there, but then having that insert that had all of the lyrics on it, the photos, that was impressive. That actually brought me back to a simpler time, so to speak. And the same thing with the Taylor Swift album, the 1989 Taylor's version. Enjoyed the double cassette on that, the two colors. This is probably my favorite one as far as the way it's put together, with the printing directly onto the cassette, and then with the photos and everything on that insert. I thought it was really, really impressive the way they put that together. The sound quality on both of these, now I could not find anywhere who's producing cassettes in the UK for distribution over there, and it said made in the UK, so I have to think that both of these were actually produced there. So again, if anybody knows, let me know. I know duplication.ca in Canada does these, but I could not find anywhere that seemed like they would do these big releases for modern artists. So let me know if you know. The sound quality on these was actually better than I expected, based on the way the tape looked and the construction of the actual cassette. They were pretty crisp. There was plenty of bass, plenty of treble. I listened to everything not only through the speakers like you guys did, but I also put the headphones on, listened to it, and both of these actually sounded pretty good. Now that actually leads me to my next point. You know, with all the young people getting into it, and I can see why these would appeal to them. I mean, the album art and the inserts, you know, besides having a physical piece of the media, that's not something that you get nowadays, and you guys aren't familiar with it as young people. So I can see why these would be attractive to you, and I'm glad you guys are getting into it. The thing that I'll say about that is that the new equipment that's being made is junk. So I don't want you guys to get excited about getting a new album, pop it into your cheap Amazon cassette player, and then be very disappointed and say, oh, well, all the hype from, you know, people that remember cassettes is right. They're terrible. They sound bad. These didn't sound bad at all. So I would encourage young people out there to skip the Amazon cheap cassette players and get something that has been serviced and that is maybe a little bit older piece of equipment. Even an older Sony Walkman can be picked up relatively inexpensively. They're easy to change the belts on if you need to do that, or just find somebody that can service one for you and have it serviced up. That way you can get the full experience if you don't want to buy a big vintage cassette deck for your home. So I hope that gives you guys a little bit of insight. Hope you guys were as impressed and unimpressed as I was with some of it. But let me know your thoughts below. I enjoy the comments that come through on the channel and reading through those and replying to as many as I can. It's a lot of fun to spend this time with you guys every week as I get the chance. So until next time, I've been Chad. This is the Vintage Electronics Channel. Happy listening. I hope you all enjoyed this look back at some of the highlights from here on the channel in 2023. If videos are sparse for the next couple of weeks, it's just because I'm concentrating on the holidays and family time this time of year. We have a new granddaughter. I try to produce a new video each week, but since this isn't my full-time job, it can get a little bit overwhelming sometimes. I appreciate the understanding that I get from all of you if there's a week without a video every now and then. Maybe at some point I can devote even more time and resources to the channel, but for now, this group of folks who are loyal followers and subscribers are more than I could have ever asked for. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart for taking time out of your busy day to spend time with all of us here on YouTube. Be sure to like this video and leave your thoughts below. And from the studio, myself, and my family, happy holidays to you all, and we'll see you all again really soon. Happy listening. Well, hi, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about how to get... I was looking back through some of the old videos, and that was the number one question I got. Welcome back to the channel. I was looking back through some... and I noticed that the number one question that keep... Can I not talk today? Yeah, it is ridiculous, so bear with me. Some of us do it for fun. We enjoy doing this type of f***ing Now, I can already hear the YouTube trolls getting ready at their keyboards to f***ing do whatever. So it's not really hard to do. You might need a little bit of extra equipment, but a lot of it can be found at your local Best Buy or your Walmart. So it's nothing specialized, nothing that can have to